Ever notice how some people seem to carry around an emotional void, a space inside that nothing ever quite fills? It doesn't matter how much love they receive, how much success they rack up, or how much the world applauds. There's just this emptiness, an insatiable hunger, and often what you're seeing isn't just some personal failing, it's narcissism. But here's the thing, narcissism isn't some random personality flaw. It doesn't just sprout up out of nowhere. It has roots, deep, specific roots, a core wound that most people, and even the individuals themselves, rarely understand. Carl Jung, that towering figure in psychology, spent decades studying how personality takes shape, and he stumbled upon something crucial. Those first 7 years of life, they're not just important, they're everything. That's the crucible where the self is formed, where a child begins to understand who they are. And the difference between a child who grows into a healthy, well-adjusted adult and one who develops narcissistic traits isn't always about what the parents actively do. It's about what they overlook, what they don't see, what they fail to respond to. There's a particular blind spot that parents of future narcissists often share in those early years. And once you grasp what it is, the whole puzzle of narcissism starts to click into place. That desperate need for constant validation, that striking lack of empathy, that bottomless craving for attention, all of it stems from a single missing element. Something that didn't happen when these individuals were too young to even understand or ask for it. That missing piece? Emotional attunement or effective mirroring. It's the ability to truly see what a child is feeling and reflect it back to them in a way that teaches them that their feelings are real, valid, important. It sounds simple, but it's profound. Let's break down what that actually means. A 2-year-old, let's call her Lily, takes a tumble and scrapes her knee. She starts to cry. It's not necessarily a scream of intense physical pain. It's more a cry of being startled, of being scared, of needing comfort. Her dad glances over and says, "You're okay, honey, it's just a little scratch. Don't cry," and moves on. Lily stops crying, not because she suddenly feels better, but because she's already learning that expressing what she feels doesn't elicit a response. She's learning that her emotions aren't important enough for someone to stop and acknowledge them. If that happens once, it's not a big deal. But imagine it happening thousands of times in those first 7 years. Now it's a pattern, a blueprint. Now it's the foundation for how this child understands the emotional world. And what she learns is devastating. She learns that feelings aren't meant to be felt. They're meant to be suppressed, ignored, minimized. Because when she does express them, nothing happens. No one sees. No one responds in a way that makes her feel seen. Jung argued that the self develops through mirroring. A child isn't born knowing who they are. They discover themselves through the reflection they see in their parents' eyes. When a baby smiles and the mother beams back with pure delight, the baby learns, "My joy is real. My joy matters. I matter." When a child is frustrated and the father gets down on their level, looks them in the eye and says, "I see that you're angry. This is tough, isn't it?" The child learns, "My anger is real. My anger can exist without destroying me. I can feel and still be loved." But when a child expresses emotion and the parents don't mirror, when they ignore, minimize, or worse, punish, the child doesn't learn to integrate their emotions. They learn to disconnect from them. And here's the crucial point: they don't learn who they truly are, because who you are, at the most fundamental level, is what you feel. Your emotions are your internal compass. They're how you navigate the world. And when you grow up without emotional attunement, you grow up without that compass. You don't know who you are. You only know who you need to appear to be in order to survive. This is the birth of the false self, the beginning of narcissism. Because a narcissist isn't someone who loves themselves too much. It's someone who never learned who they really are. So they create an image, a facade, and they spend their entire lives defending that image, seeking external validation for an identity that was built to impress, not to express truth. Those first 7 years are a critical period because that's when the brain is developing most rapidly. It's when the neural circuits for emotional regulation are being wired. And these circuits don't form in a vacuum. They form through co-regulation. The child feels something intense that they don't know how to process. The parent sees it, names it, and welcomes it. And through this repetition of thousands of interactions, the child internalizes the ability to do this for themselves, to feel, name, process, regulate. But when there's no attunement, when the child's emotion is ignored, they don't internalize regulation. They internalize suppression or explosion. They learn that emotions are dangerous, that they need to be rigidly controlled or avoided completely, and this creates adults who are either cold, disconnected, and unable to access what they feel, or intensely volatile, with emotional outbursts that even they don't understand. Both are symptoms of the same root cause, lack of emotional attunement in those early years, the absence of someone who saw what the child felt and said, "I see you. What you feel is real. You are not alone in this." Let me give you a specific example of how this plays out in the formation of narcissism. A 5-year-old boy, let's call him Ethan, draws a picture at school. He is so proud. He drew his family. He races home, clutching the paper with both hands, and shows it to his mom. His mom glances at it for 2 seconds, says, "That's nice, sweetie," and goes back to scrolling on her phone. Ethan stands there, holding the drawing, waiting for something more, but nothing comes. What just happened? He experienced a moment of genuine joy, of pride, of wanting to share something he felt, and the response was empty. There was no attunement. His mum didn't stop to really see it, didn't ask about the drawing, didn't connect with his feeling. She offered empty words and went back to her own world. For Ethan, this registers in a very specific way. My feelings aren't interesting enough to make people stop. My joy doesn't matter. And if this happens repeatedly, over years, he stops trusting his internal joy. He stops seeking real emotional connection. Instead, he starts seeking external recognition, approval, praise. Not because he wants to share joy, but because he needs to fill the void where attunement should be. Decades later, Ethan is an adult who constantly needs validation, who talks endlessly about his accomplishments, who seems arrogant, and people call him a narcissist. But what they don't see is that behind all that neediness is a 5-year-old boy, still holding a drawing, waiting for someone to really see him, to really care, to really attune to what he's feeling. That's the cruelty of narcissism. It's not that these people don't want connection, it's that they never learned how to have real connection, because real connection stems from being seen emotionally, and they never were. Carl Jung. Now, he had a concept called the transcendent function. It's the ability to hold two opposites at the same time and integrate them, to feel anger and love for the same person, to be strong and vulnerable, to be confident and harbor doubts. This ability only develops when you've experienced emotional attunement in childhood, because you first need to learn that it's safe to feel contradictory emotions, that you won't shatter, that someone can hold the entire complexity of what you feel. But children who grow up without attunement don't learn this. They learn that emotions need to be simple, black or white. So they grow up and see the world in extremes. Someone is either perfect or terrible. They themselves are either superior or utterly inadequate. There's no middle ground, no nuance, because there was never anyone who held the nuance of what they felt when they were little. And here's something a lot of folks don't understand. Parents who neglect emotional attunement aren't necessarily abusive in the traditional sense. Many of them love their child, provide everything materially, want the best, but they themselves never had attunement, so they don't know how to give it. They think love is giving food, clothes, education, and that is love. But it's not attunement. Attunement is a much more subtle form of love. It's seeing the child's inner world and validating it. You can love someone without emotionally attuning to them. It happens all the time, and it creates a brutal confusion in the child, because they feel that they are loved, but they also feel that they are not seen. And that contradiction creates a profound anxiety. The child can't name it. They just feel that something is missing, that they're doing something wrong, that if they were different, maybe their parents really would see them. And then begins the performance. The child starts trying to be what they think will make their parents stop and really pay attention. They try to be perfect, or they try to be troublesome, anything to generate a real emotional response. And when nothing works, when the attunement never comes, the child stops trying to connect and starts building an identity based on how they can manipulate the external world to get what they need. That is narcissism in formation. A child who learns that real emotional connection is unavailable, so they develop strategies to get attention, admiration, control. Because if they can't have attunement, they'll have power. If they can't be seen for who they are, they'll make people look at an image that they construct. The first 7 years are critical, because after that period, the patterns are established. The brain becomes less plastic. The personality solidifies. You can still change. You can still heal, but it's much harder, because the neural circuits are already formed. The beliefs about oneself and the world are already etched in stone. A child who has reached 7 years without consistent emotional attunement has already internalized deep messages. My feelings don't matter. I'm not interesting for who I am. Love is conditional. I need to perform to be seen. And these messages become the lens through which they see everything. All future relationships, all self-perception, everything. And here's the part that a lot of people get wrong. They think narcissists don't feel, that they're empty inside. But the truth is the opposite. Narcissists feel intensely. It's just that they've disconnected from what they feel, because it was never safe to feel. There was never anyone to mirror, validate, help them process. So these feelings were buried so deep that not even the person themselves can access them. On the outside, you see someone cold, calculating, focused on status. On the inside, there's a terrified child, desperate for connection, but completely without the tools to get it. Because the tools of emotional connection are learned in the first 7 years through attunement, and when that window closes, without the child having learned, they get trapped in patterns of seeking external validation instead of developing internal validation. Trapped in building images instead of truly knowing themselves. So when you see a narcissistic adult, what you're seeing is not someone who loves themselves too much. It's someone who was never taught to know themselves, who never had someone attune emotionally, consistently in the years that mattered, and now spends their life trying to fill an emotional void that formed so early that they don't even remember it exists. They just feel the emptiness. and try to fill it with admiration, with achievement, with control. But nothing fills it, because what's missing is not something external. It's something that should have been internalized in childhood. The ability to feel real, to feel seen, to trust that who you are, with all your feelings, is enough. That is the true cause of narcissism. And it starts much earlier than most people imagine. It starts the moment a child expresses emotion, and no one really sees. And it repeats every day, for 7 years, until the child gives up on showing who they really are and starts building who they think they need to be. Now, let me show you the contrast. Let me show you what happens when there is emotional attunement, because only when you see the difference is that you understand what was lost. The same scene. A 5-year-old child draws a picture, runs home excitedly, holding the paper. But this time, when they show it to their mom, the mom stops what she's doing, puts her phone aside, looks at the drawing, and more importantly, looks at the child, sees the sparkle in their eyes, sees the pride, and connects with that. The mom says, "Wow, you're so proud of this. Tell me about your drawing." And the child starts to talk about the colors they chose, about who's who in the family, and the mom listens, asks questions, not because she's evaluating the artistic quality, but because she's interested in the child's inner world, in what the child felt when they made it. And when the child finishes talking, the mom might say, "I see how much effort you put into this. You must be feeling so happy," and sticks the drawing on the fridge, not as an automatic gesture, but as real validation of what the child expressed. What happened here? Emotional attunement. The mum saw not just the drawing, but the feeling behind it, and reflected that feeling back to the child. The child learns, my joy is important. When I feel something and share it, people connect with me. My feelings make sense. I make sense. This child isn't going to grow up desperately needing external validation because they already have internal validation. They've learned that what they feel is real and valuable, not because they're perfect, not because their emotions are always appropriate, but because they're human. And being human means feeling, and feeling is valid. Do you see the difference? It's not about praising everything a child does. It's not about making the child feel special all the time. It's about seeing the child, really seeing them, seeing what they're feeling, and validating that those feelings are real and important, even when they're difficult, even when they're inconvenient, even when they don't make logical sense. And in the first 7 years, this needs to happen thousands of times, not perfectly. No parent is perfect, but consistently enough that the child internalizes a fundamental truth. I am real. What I feel matters. I deserve to be seen. When that doesn't happen, when there's a chronic absence of emotional attunement, the child internalizes the opposite. I am not real. What I feel doesn't matter. I only deserve to be seen when I perform something that impresses. And that is the seed of narcissism. It's not planted by obvious abuse. It's planted by subtle absence, by thousands of moments where the child turned to their parents seeking emotional connection and found emptiness. Carl Jung had an expression. He said that the greatest burden a child can carry is the unlived life of the parents. What does that mean? It means that when parents haven't processed their own emotions, when they themselves never had emotional attunement in childhood, they can't offer emotional attunement to their children because you can't give what you don't have. So emotionally disconnected parents create emotionally disconnected children, not because they want to, but because it's all they know. They think they're doing a good job. After all, they provide, they protect, they educate. But emotional attunement isn't even on their radar because it was never on their own parents' radar, and that creates generations of narcissism. Not the obvious, dramatic narcissism you see in movies, but the subtle narcissism that permeates the culture. People who are successful but empty, who have relationships but never feel truly connected, who achieve but never feel fulfilled, because deep down, they're still that 5-year-old holding a drawing that no one really saw. The first 7 years, that's the period. After that, you can still heal. You can still learn emotional attunement. But it's going to be through therapy, through intensely conscious relationships, through a lot of inner work. Because you'll be unlearning patterns that are already deeply entrenched. You'll be reconfiguring neural circuits that are already established. But if you catch a child in the first 7 years and give them consistent emotional attunement, you're preventing decades of suffering. You're giving them the foundation for a life where they can know themselves, regulate themselves, connect genuinely with others, where they don't need to build facades, where they can simply be. And if you're an adult who never had that emotional attunement, who recognizes these patterns in yourself, that's not a death sentence. It's a diagnosis, and diagnoses allow treatment. When you understand that your narcissism isn't who you are, but what you develop to survive the lack of emotional attunement, you can start to develop that attunement internally. You can start to see yourself, to validate your own feelings, to stop seeking in others what only you can give yourself. That is the hope. Even when the cause is in the first 7 years, the healing can start now. Today, the moment you stop ignoring what your parents ignored, the moment you choose to see yourself with the compassion you never received, the moment you learn to attune emotionally to yourself. Even if it's 40, 50 years after when you should have learned, the narcissistic wound is deep, but it's not permanent. It just needs to be seen, validated, and healed with the kind of emotional attunement that its absence created. You can become, for yourself, the attuned parent you needed to have. And when you do that, something inside you that was frozen since you were 5 years old finally starts to melt, finally starts to feel real. Let me show you how this works at different ages within those first 7 years, because each phase has its own needs for emotional attunement. In the first 2 years, attunement is about basic regulation. The baby cries, they're hungry, sleepy, uncomfortable. The parents respond, they feed, they swaddle, they comfort. But it's not just about satisfying physical needs. It's about how you do it. If you pick up the baby with impatience, with irritation, the baby feels it. If you pick up the baby with presence, with calm, even when you're tired, the baby also feels it. And what the baby is learning isn't just that their needs will be met. It's that they matter. That their discomfort generates a response, that the world is a place where when they express a need, someone sees and responds. This creates what psychologists call secure attachment, and secure attachment is the foundation of everything. It's the confidence that you can depend on others, that you are not alone, that connection is possible and safe. When that doesn't happen consistently in the first 2 years, when the baby expresses need and often encounters absence, delay, or a response without emotional presence, they learn the opposite. The world isn't safe. People aren't trustworthy. I need to fend for myself. And that is the first seed of narcissism. The child starts to develop premature self-sufficiency. They stop seeking connection because seeking hurts more than not having it. Between 2 and 4 years old, the attunement shifts. Now the child is developing language, autonomy, free will. They say no. They throw tantrums. They test boundaries. And what they need isn't parents who give in to everything. It's parents who can hold their emotional intensity without becoming dysregulated themselves. A 3-year-old wants a cookie before dinner. The mom says no. The child explodes, cries, screams, throws themselves on the floor. And here is the critical moment. The mom can do one of 3 things. She can give in, giving the cookie to make the child stop crying. She can punish, yelling or sending the child to their room. Or she can attune. Attuning looks like this. The mom crouches down, gets on the child's level, and says something like, "You're really mad because you want the cookie now. I understand. It's hard to wait when you want something so badly. But we're going to have dinner first. And then you can have a treat. I know that's frustrating." What happened? The mom didn't give in. She maintained the boundary, but she saw the feeling. She named the feeling. She validated that the feeling is real and makes sense. And the child, even still frustrated, is learning something fundamental. My anger is valid. I can be angry and still be loved. My feelings make sense, even when I don't get what I want. But if the mum always gives in, the child learns. If I escalate emotionally enough, I control the world. This creates narcissism through overindulgence. If a parent always punishes, the child learns, my feelings are wrong. I am wrong for feeling. This creates narcissism through shame. And if a parent ignores, the child learns, my feelings don't matter, I don't matter. This creates narcissism through emotional neglect. Do you see how all roads lead to the same place when emotional attunement is missing? It doesn't matter if the parents are too permissive or too strict. If they aren't attuning emotionally, if they aren't seeing and validating the child's feelings, the outcome is the same. A child who grows up without knowing how to self-regulate, without trusting their own emotional experience, without the capacity for genuine emotional connection. Between the ages of 4 and 7, emotional attunement becomes even more complex. Now, the child is developing a sense of themselves in the world. They're going to school, making friends, having experiences outside of the family. And what they need is parents who can mirror their experience without projecting their own issues. 6-year-old Lily comes home from school upset because a friend didn't want to play with her, and she tells her dad, Michael, about it. Michael can respond in several ways. He could minimize, "That's nothing, sweetie. You'll make other friends." He could solve it. "I'm going to call his parents and get this straightened out right now." He could ignore it. "I'm busy right now. Tell me later." Or he could attune. Attuning looks like this. Michael stops what he's doing, looks at Lily and says, "It sounds like you're feeling sad, that this really hurt you. Do you want to tell me more about what happened?" And then he listens, really listens, not to fix it, not to teach a lesson, but to understand how Lily felt. And after understanding, he reflects, "It must have been hard when your friend said he didn't want to play. I imagine you felt rejected. It's normal to feel that way." What is Lily learning? That emotional pain is valid, that she can bring her wounds home, and they will be seen with compassion, that she doesn't have to carry everything alone. That connection is available when she is suffering, and that ability to seek connection when suffering is the opposite of narcissism. Narcissists can't do that. When they're suffering, they isolate, or attack, or deny the pain completely, because they never learned that it's safe to be vulnerable, that pain can be shared, that you don't have to be always strong, always in control, always performing. By age 7, the fundamental patterns are established. The child has already internalized thousands of interactions, And these interactions have created an internal program, a belief about how the world works, about whether she is worthy of love, about whether her emotions are valid, about whether connection is possible. And here's the part that many people don't understand. You don't have to have abusive parents to develop narcissism. You just need to have parents who don't know how to attune, and most parents don't know, because they themselves never had emotional attunement, so they do the best they can. They provide, they protect, they educate, and they think that's enough. But it's not, because a child can have all their material needs met and still grow up with a huge emotional void, can have the best toys, the best education, the best house, and still feel fundamentally invisible because nobody saw what she felt, nobody validated her internal experience, nobody taught her that who she is on the inside matters just as much as what she does on the outside. And when that child grows up, she seeks outside what she never had inside, seeks recognition, admiration, status, because if she can't feel seen for who she is, she'll make people look at what she's achieved. If she can't have real emotional connection, she'll have power, control, influence, something that makes her feel important, since she never felt important simply for existing. That's narcissism, and it starts in the first 7 years, with thousands of small absences, thousands of moments where the child turned to their parents and found a wall, not a wall of abuse, a wall of non-presence, of disconnection, of parents who were there physically, but not emotionally, who looked but didn't see, who heard but didn't really listen. And the tragedy is these parents often love their children, sacrifice for them, work hard to give them a better life. But love without emotional attunement doesn't build a healthy self. It builds a child who knows they are loved, but doesn't feel seen. And that contradiction is confusing and painful, because how do you reconcile being loved, but not known, being cared for, but not understood? You don't reconcile it. You just develop defense mechanisms, and those mechanisms, when they solidify over years, become personality, become narcissism, an entire structure built around never having to feel that original pain of expressing who you are and finding emptiness. Carl Jung said that neurosis is always a substitute for legitimate suffering, and narcissism is exactly that. It's a symptom. It's a substitute for the pain of never having been seen emotionally. Instead of feeling that pain, you build a grandiose image. You seek constant validation. You control how people see you, because if you can control the image, you never have to face the emptiness that's underneath. But the emptiness never goes away. It only gets deeper, because no amount of external admiration can fill the hole left by the lack of emotional attunement in the first 7 years. That hole can only be filled by real emotional connection, by vulnerability, by allowing yourself to be seen for who you really are. And for a narcissist, that is terrifying, because they've spent their whole life building defenses against exactly that. The last time they tried to be seen, in those first 7 years, nobody looked. And that pain was so great that they decided unconsciously never to take that risk again. So they perform, impress, control, and become increasingly isolated behind the facade, because the facade protects from the pain, but it also protects from the connection. The good news is, it's never too late to learn emotional attunement. It's never too late to start seeing yourself, to validate your own feelings, to seek relationships where you can be vulnerable, where you can be seen, where you can finally put the facade aside and discover who you are beneath it. This requires courage, because it means facing the pain that you've avoided your whole life. But when you face it, when you finally feel it, something miraculous happens. The pain starts to dissolve, Because pain seen, felt, validated can finally heal. Behind the narcissism, behind all the defenses, there's a real person, a person worthy of being seen, known, loved, not for the image, not for the achievement, but for who they are, but simply by existing. That's the cure. And it starts with understanding the cause, seeing that narcissism isn't a character flaw, it's a survival strategy. It's what you developed when emotional attunement wasn't available in the years that mattered most. When you see it with compassion, you can begin to let down those defenses. You can start to learn what you should have learned from 0 to 7 years old, that you are real, that what you feel matters, that you deserve to be seen. And that connection is possible when you allow yourself to be vulnerable. If you recognized yourself in this description, comment below. Share your experience. When you name it in the world, you start to break the isolation. You discover that you're not alone, that millions of people carry this same wound, and that healing is possible. And if you want to understand more about how childhood patterns shape who you become, subscribe to the channel. Here we explore the truths that Carl Jung revealed, the unconscious patterns that drive our lives, and how to bring them to consciousness, to be free. Remember, you are not your wound. You are not your defenses. Beneath that, there's a real person, waiting to be seen. And the person who can do that first is you. When you become for yourself the emotionally attuned parent you needed to have, you start to heal the wound that formed in those first 7 years. And something that was frozen inside you since childhood finally begins to live.